I'm also like not very good at so like I remember like you know how like when you teach the section like they make you like get all the students like emails and like something like I'm like I could never remember the things so I just like go back. Oh, yeah, I think that was
Hi everyone. For those of you who just joined, we'll be starting at Berkeley time, which is in 8 minutes. So sit tight.
so they have a very small one. But they don't have any
Hey everyone. For those of you who just joined, we'll be starting at Berkeley time, which will be in 5 minutes. So sit tight. Alrighty, it's 3:40, and I think we should get started. So let me just make sure the recording started. Okay, and yeah, before we get started, I just want to make sure that everyone should definitely check out our decal website. So actually, before that, let me just introduce myself. My name is Alex. I'm right now a senior studying computer science, graduating very soon. And I'm from the club web development at Berkeley, as you probably can tell from my Zoom background. And today I'm going to teach you how to do some very, very basic web development. And even with some like very basic web development knowledge, you can already build out some very, very cool website. And before we dive right in, I just want to mention that our club also holds a decal. And the decal is called the Introduction to Full Stack Development. And for full stack development, essentially, it's just a fancy way of saying doing everything by yourself using web development. So yeah, and our decal website is fullstack.com and fullstackdecal.com. So make sure to check that out. And if you are interested in applying, please apply before January 30th as our application deadline. So yeah, and now let me send a link in chat. And I've just sent a link in chat, and this link will take you to this page. So, okay, let me just make sure everything's configured correctly. Okay. Alrighty. So for those of you who just joined, I will share the link again in chat. So this link will lead you to a GitHub repo containing some of our workshop material. And today we're looking at the web dev intro workshop. Okay. And for those of you who haven't used GitHub before, you can think of GitHub as a central place where developers upload their code. And other people can just like download their code from GitHub, and everything's free. It's very easy to use, and lots of people really like to use it, especially lots of developers. And so once you go onto this page, you can see there are a bunch of files here, and there's also down below there's a file called readme.md. This is essentially kind of like the documentation for this repo. And the documentation here is essentially our tutorial, and which we'll be covering in today's workshop. And as you can see, this workshop is divided into 3 parts. First of all, we'll go over the basic of web development, which is HTML. Then we'll make your website beautiful and functional with CSS and JavaScript. And finally, if we have time, we'll briefly introduce Bootstrap. And each part corresponds to a folder up here. So as you can see, there's 3 folders: part 1 HTML, part 2 CSS.js, and part 3 Bootstrap. As we move through each part, we will be changing from folders to folders. And at the end of the workshop, you should be able to build something like this. So this is kind of like a vintage, old-fashioned Apple website for selling Macintosh, at least an old model of it. And there are 2 buttons. One's to learn more, and the other's purchase. And I believe after you click on purchase, you'll say it's sold out. But there's also a learn more button, and if you click on it, it will lead you to another page, kind of like as a description for this Macintosh. So yeah, so as you can tell, this website, even though it's pretty simple, but it looks pretty. I will argue it looks pretty, and it has kind of like a minimalistic design. And this is probably what you would need for any like personal website or some simple sites to put on some resumes. So yeah. Now let's get started. So first of all, to use GitHub, we need to download something called Git. And Git is essentially a tool that works behind GitHub. And it's a tool where we can use to fetch to the term is called git clone, to clone all the code down into our local computer. And to download Git, you can go to this link to download. And if you are on MacBook, I believe the Git is automatically installed for you. I can be wrong, you can double check. But if you don't have it, please go to this link and download. And after you download this Git, you can then clone the code from this repo by doing this in your terminal. Actually, not this, because we have changed the link a little bit. But you can go to workshops. So essentially go to the parent folder of the web dev intro workshop. And then there's a green button here. It says code. And then you click on it, and there's a clone. And you copy the link. And then you open up a terminal. And to open up a terminal, you type terminal inside MacBook. And then, oops, let me just, okay. And after you copy the this link, here copy, you find any folder inside your terminal, it can be anything, and then you type git clone, and then paste your link here. Okay, and after you hit enter, it will start downloading a bunch of files, and I have already downloaded, I have already cloned the workshops folder here inside our terminal, as you can see, workshops. So, and once you have done git clone, you should be able to use, you should be able to enter this folder. And to enter this folder, you use a command called cd. This is abbreviated for change directory. So cd workshops will take you into the workshops folder. Okay. Does anyone else get the error remote support for password authentication? We should remove it on. So this, yeah. So if you have used personal authentication before using GitHub on your local computer, that method of authentication was deprecated by GitHub, and you should be so you should be able to like create a personal access token on GitHub, and then use that personal access token to access the code. Okay, yeah, I hope that helps. I also received a question in chat. How do we access the terminal again? So yeah, you can, the way how I access it is by typing, clicking Command and space. So once you click Command and space, at least on MacBook, there's a kind of like a spotlight search here showing up, and then you type terminal, and then you should be able to like access terminal. Yeah, great questions. If you have any question, feel free to say on the chat or unmute yourself.
Sorry, could you just repeat where we're supposed to clone it again?
Yeah, so to so for the link, you can get it from here. And in terms of like where you should put the folder, it's really up to you. You can put it anywhere you want, essentially. But yeah.
So we should just paste the URL?
Oh, so to clone the repo, you do git clone and then paste the URL.
Okay, thank you so much.
Mm-hmm. Alrighty, and once you have cloned the workshops repo. Oh yeah, another thing is that if you have trouble cloning this repo or have any trouble like using Git, you can always download it as a zip folder. And so you can download it as a zip and then unzip it, and you can use it the way you can use it that way as well. So with GitHub, do we create an account with our school email or personal? It's up to you, personal choices. I do it with my school email, but actually I do it with my personal email, but it's up to you. Okay, so once you have cloned the repo into any folder you want, then you can type out, for instance, so say this is kind of like the terminal, how it looks like after you clone the folder. The type out list. It's for ls is shorted for list, and then after type out list, you can see the terminal lists out a bunch of folders here, and these are kind of like all the files and all the folders inside your current folder. And you can see one of them is called workshops, and this is a folder that we want to go into. So to change to that folder, we do cd workshops, and then we'll navigate into this folder. Okay. And to be honest, you don't really need to do all this, but this is just kind of like a brief introduction to how the terminal works, and which will be handy if you do decide to, dive a little bit deeper into computer science or web development. What you really need to do is to open up these, the repo by using any text editor that you like. Right now, I'm using something called Visual Studio Code. This is one of the more established text editor that people use. You can also use any other editors as you like. So once we open up the Visual Studio Code, we can then close the terminal, and then we're ready to write some code. Okay. Now I'm just make sure everything's arranged properly and cool. So now let's look at part 1, HTML. So we are looking into the part 1 HTML folder. As you can see, inside part 1, there are a folder called image. There are also 2 files. One is called about.html, one is called index.html. Okay. And for about.html and index.html, these 2 are all HTML files. And HTML files are the skeleton of any websites. So for instance, if you look on the right here, this is a very, very basic example of an HTML. Let's try to copy and paste this here. And if we click save, and then let's try to open up this file using Chrome or any web browser you want. So let's open up about.html. And then as you can see here, we have successfully created our first HTML file and essentially our first website. The HTML is essentially made of text and content. So each line here, as you can see, you need to put everything inside tags. So first of all, there's a very big HTML tags outside of everything that you wrote. This indicates that this file is an HTML file. And this is an opening tag. Opening tag is essentially like by this kind of like pointy bracket, triangle bracket. And then within it, it's HTML. And this is a closing tag. The difference between the open tag and the closing tag is that the closing tag has a backslash, this is a slash or a backslash, but I'll just call it a slash. The closing tag has an extra slash in front of the tag name. Okay, and everything that goes in between is the content of this HTML tag. As you can see, this for this HTML, for the HTML tag, there are actually two other tags that go inside, which means that you can actually nest the tags inside one another. And for this tag, this is a H1 tag. And H1 tag is the biggest headline tag. There's also a H2 tag. So if we change this to H2 and we refresh the page, as you can see, the hello world become a little bit smaller. We can also change it to much smaller, for instance, H4, and then we refresh it. As you can see, it becomes much smaller. This is just essentially different sizes of headline that you can use. There's also a P tag. P tag stands for paragraph. This is where you will use if you expect to have a bunch of words or text. Now let's take a look at our about.html. This is a file that you should receive once you clone it. As you can see here, we have some pretty familiar tags. For instance, HTML, which we just covered, H1, we have already covered this as well, and also a paragraph tag. We also have some new tags. For instance, here, a head tag. A head tag, this is essentially all the metadata of a website. And so for instance here, one of the metadata is called title. And the title is actually referring to this, the tab name. So if you want to change the tab name, you should first of all use head tags, and inside it, use the title tag. And this way you can change the title of the website. So this you can also include quite a lot of other metadata inside the head tag, but this is the most commonly used ones. And there's also another tag that's very interesting, which is called the image tag. And the image tag is where you are able to include an image on the website. So as you can see on the right, here, there's a picture of Macintosh. And how to include the image is by, so first of all, you need to put the image. You don't really need to put the image inside the folder. This is just a better practice. And so here, we have an image folder that's on the same level as our about.html file. And inside this image folder, we have mac.jpg. And so to include this image, we simply put image/mac.jpg. And this way, you will include the image, okay? And also remember to put source equals the link to the image. Essentially, source equals before the link to the image, okay? And there's also a out equals a picture of Macintosh. So this is used when someone doesn't have a very stable internet access. So for instance, if they don't have, for instance, if their Wi-Fi doesn't work that well and they cannot load that big a picture, then in that case, an alternative text will show up. It will show a picture of Macintosh as text inside like the space of the picture. There's also another property here called width. Width here is set to 400 pixel. This is just a way to measure the width, like length inside any browser. We can change it to 300 pixel. As you can see, it becomes a little bit smaller. We can change it to 600 pixel. It becomes larger. So yeah, this is for the image tag. And all these source equals something or alt equals something, these are called properties for the HTML text. And there's only a limited amount of properties that you can use on some of the text. And I would say these are the most common ones. And also for the link, and also including a link tag. This is also a very, very common one that we use. We'll introduce this later. But before we go any further, do we have any questions? Okay, and now let's move on to the link tag. The link tag, as you can see here, there's a link here, and this is a link tag. And the link tag is used to take you to another web page. So for instance, when you click on home, it will lead you to another web page. Okay, and to create a link tag, we use something called A. And A is essentially saying that, okay, this is a hyperlink. And then the reference here, essentially which website or which web page should this link jump to will be included here. As you can see here, we're not actually jumping to an external website. We're jumping to another index.html file. So let's take a look at this index.html file. So when we click home, as you can see, it jumps to index.html. And inside index.html, we also have Macintosh, an image, and also 2 links. One of the link is saying to learn more, and this learn more link direct us back to about.html. So essentially, these 2 websites, they refer to each other through this hyperlink. There's also another hyperlink. It's saying purchase. And there's also a hashtag here. And why is a hashtag? It's essentially saying that instead of redirecting to other websites, we want you to redirect it to yourself. And usually this is used when we don't want to go to any other websites, but we still kind of like want to trigger something using this link. We'll be talking more about this purchase button later when we introduce JavaScript. So yeah. So this is essentially part 1. And part 1 is about HTML. And for HTML, just to recap, we have various different tags. We have HTML tag, head tag for metadata, also H1 tag for headlines, P tag for paragraph, image tag for image, and A tag for links. And remember, there is the opening tag and closing tag. And the difference between opening tag and closing tag is a slash here. Okay. Cool. And now let's move on to part 2. Okay, so part 2, CSS and JavaScript. Now that we have covered the basics of HTML, it's time to give our website more stylings. And CSS is a language that builds upon HTML and that adds style to your document. Okay. Now let's actually instead of like actually let's go to part 2, CSS.js. Close down the previous files and open up some new files. Okay. And now let's close those 2. And instead open up part 2. Open up those 2 links. Index. Oops. also open up this. Oops, as you can see, the styling is a little bit weird because we didn't. So this is what the style should be able to look should look like. And as you can see, when the website gets a little bit smaller, the styling is messed up a little bit. This is something pretty, not really that advanced, but which we will not cover in today's lecture. It's called responsiveness. Essentially, a website should fit their image according to the size of the browser's window, but we won't talk about this today. But yeah, now let's take a look at CSS. So this is a basic example of a CSS. And CSS, there are two parts to it. One's called a selector, and the other are declarations. And selector is used to select which elements you want to put a style on. And declarations essentially is these kind of like property-like things here. And this adds, for instance, colors to any HTML text, or background colors, or font size. Let's see this in action. This will make much more sense. Okay, so for instance, let's look at About Macintosh, this page. Let's go back and open up style.css. So all CSS files are usually put in something called style.css. Okay, now let's comment all this out, which is essentially saying that we don't want any of the cells. Oops, this is a very, very big image. Let me just add some width to it. I don't want it to be that big.
Oh, yeah, I see it.
So width equals 400 pixel. Okay, and refresh. Okay, cool. So this is kind of like what we have done in the previous HTML part. And now let's try to add more styles into this. So if we look at our kind of like finished product, as we can see, the About Macintosh, they kind of have a different size and also a different font, right? So let's go into it. And then let's go ahead and try change the font family of all the text, okay? Oops, wait, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, actually, let's do a different way. All right, so I think what we should do is to introduce these properties one by one. Let me just quickly comment this out. Okay, sorry about that. Alrighty, and now first of all, let's introduce font size. Font size is the size of the font that's displaying. So for instance, if we comment this to out and save it, as you can see, the About Macintosh is pretty small. And if we look at the final product, it should really be pretty big. And now let's go to our VS Code. And let's uncomment these two lines. Okay. So we have H1 font size 80 pixel. So this is essentially one CSS rules. This rules is we have a font size declaration and we select the H1 element. Okay. So essentially, as you can see here in the about.html, we have different elements. And here, actually here we don't have an H1 tag. So the H1 is probably like used on index.html. But here we do have H2 tag, as you can see here. So for the H2 tag, to select this H2 tag, we use the H2 selector followed by a curly bracket. Okay, so H2 curly bracket This is essentially saying that we'll select the H2 tag. And then we call font size equals 50 pixel on it. And as a result, as you can see, this becomes much larger. If we change it to, for instance, 100 pixel, the About Macintosh becomes super big. Let's change it back to 50 pixel. Okay. Now we have to make this larger, but as you can see, the font family doesn't really match. Essentially, the style of the font doesn't really match. And to change the style of the font, we can do something like this. So here, as you can see, there are multiple elements selected here. We have selected H1, H2, a P tag, and also an A tag. And this is essentially a way for us to write CSS more efficiently, where we can select 4 tags simultaneously and then add some properties or declarations to it. And here we are changing the font family to this. I believe this is a default font of Apple. And we are also giving them a margin bottom of 15 pixel. So what's margin? Margin is the distance between each element, each block, essentially. You can think of the text as a one big block on the website. And here, this is like another big block. And adding margin equals 15 pixel, it's saying that there should be a 15 pixel distance margin between each blocks, so that each element will not like stick to each other too closely. So right now we have changed margin bottom and we have changed the font family. Let's refresh. As you can see, now the font looks a little bit better. And to really demonstrate the margin, let's change the margin to 100 pixel, 150 pixel. As you can see here, after About Macintosh, there's a huge gap. And this gap, it's about like 150 pixel. And the reason for that gap to like showing up here is because we have changed the margin bottom to 150 pixel. Okay. And as you can see, this also applies to this paragraph tag. Since we have selected P here, we have also selected A here. As a result, there's 150 pixel here after the link. So cool. Now let's change it back to 15 pixel. And let's take a look at our finished product again. As you can see here, we also have some line heights. So the line heights here for this paragraph, like this new Macintosh, blah, blah, blah. Here, the line height is a little bit larger than what we have. Ours is more like stick with each other. So let's go ahead and add that as well. To add line heights, we can do that by saying, first of all, selecting P, since we only want to change the paragraph tag. And then we can, we also have make the font size a little bit larger, just to make it more easy, just to make it easier to see. And then we use line height equals 30 pixel to change it. Okay, let's hit refresh and boom. As you can see here, the line is more separated with each other. And if we make it like to say 40 pixel, oops, if we make it to 40 pixel, as you can see, the line height becomes much bigger. And let's change it to 30, change it back to 30 pixel. And cool. Now our website is looking good. But you might notice that there's one crucial difference between our website and the finished product, which is that everything here is centered, but not our font, but not our text. So how do we center our text? This is a little bit more tricky to do. And as you can see, to support this, we have added another HTML tag. So this is called a div. A div is usually used when we want to group a bunch of HTML tags together. So here, as you can see, the About Macintosh, the paragraph, and the button here, they are all kind of like grouped together and centered together. And since they are all kind of like grouped together, we can wrap it around a div tag. So here there's a div, and also center your box. There, the div ends here, and inside this div, we have included all the 3 elements: so the title, the description, and the link. And so this way we can select these 3 elements more easily. And also we have named the div class as center box. So class is a pretty special property of any HTML tag. It's essentially a way to add another name to the tag. So usually we'll refer to this div as div, right? But if we add class equals center box, we can then select this div without selecting other div. So let's say there's also another div here. Div class equals some other box. Div. If there's some like other div with some other stuff there, and we don't want to change the style of this other div, and we only want to change the center box, we can do so by using this. Okay, so here, as you can see, we do dot center box, and this is a way of selecting class. As you can see, if I hover to the CSS, it actually says element class equals center box, and this is exactly what we are selecting here. So div class equals center box, and this way we can select this entire div without influencing other elements. And for this center box, to center it, we first of all set its position to absolute. This means that the position of this center box is no longer related to other elements. Why do we do this? Because this is because we want to center it. We don't want it to be influenced by other elements. For instance, the image. And then we do something like left 50 pixel, top 45 pixel. Why don't we do top 50 pixel? This is just because top 50 will put the box a little bit too down. I don't want it to be like too low on the website. So a little bit higher would be more preferable. And then we do something like transform translate. This is kind of like a hack. For now, you can just remember it. But what it does is that it will shift the width, shift the element by 50% of its width and 50% of its height. This is because all the CSS elements or the HTML elements are calculated using their starting point. And their starting point are at the top left corner of each element. And this way, when we actually put something, for instance, at the center of the website, it will be offset by itself's width and itself's height. As a result, we need to transform back by 50% of its width, 50% of its height. And after we've done that, we also do text align center. And this way, all the texts are aligned center. And once we hit refresh, as we can see, now everything's centered. I know this can be a little bit intimidating when you just when you are just getting familiar with CSS, but usually we recommend just to copy and paste this code whenever you want to center something. This is probably the best way to do it. And so yeah, you don't really need to fully comprehend it to use it. And this is kind of like the gist of CSS, because CSS is pretty tricky. And now, if we look at our final product, as we can see, already most of our styles are looking very good. And one thing is that the image is not kind of like filled on the entire website. So let's change that as well. So let's go ahead and change that. So what we have done is to also give the image a class of cover image. And then again, to select the class, we use a dot selector followed by the class name. And this way we can select the class for this image and only this image. And then we set it to width, 100 view width. 100 view width is essentially saying 100% of the current browser window. And this way, the image will take up the entire space of the website. Okay, now we're looking good. And the final thing is to change this link to a button. And to change it to a button, we first of all need to get rid of its original text decoration. So for instance, if you look at this link here, it's kind of like purple and there's still an underline. This just doesn't look really good. As a result, let's change the text decoration to none. And this will essentially abandon all the original text decoration. And we then change it to display inline block. This is essentially saying that instead of displaying it as a text, we display as a type block. And only if we change it this way, we can then add width and height to the text. So we add width 100% and height 30 pixel. And now let's hit refresh. As you can see, the original style is gone. And I also notice if we hover over the home button, it will show up as a green, the text. And this is implemented using the pseudo class here. So the pseudo class is, you can create a pseudo class by using column. And so you do actually this is called semicolon. Yeah, semicolon, hover, and then followed by color green. And this is essentially saying that when the user hover onto the button, the text will become green. And otherwise, it will not. It will be its original color. So cool. Now we have added all our CSS. Do we have any questions? Okay, let's see. There's a question. I have a question kind of off topic. Can someone else access our website's code if we don't code it right or save it correctly? I'm trying to learn on my own, so I'm just curious. Okay. So other people, if you don't deploy your website onto the World Wide Web, other people cannot access your website's code. Essentially, all the stuff. If you open up a browser. If you open up a HTML using browser, this will not be seen by other people. The only way for you to deploy your website is by, for instance, use some deploy service. GitHub offers something called GitHub Pages. This is a pretty good way to deploy your website if you would like to do so. But if you don't deploy a website, other people will not be able to access it. Cool. Now let's briefly cover JavaScript since we're kind of out of time. But JavaScript is also a very critical part of web development. And it's usually used to make the website a little bit smarter. As you can see right now, the website is kind of dumb. It doesn't really changes a lot depending on users' input. So let's actually change the button so that when the user click on this purchase button, it will show up Macintosh was sold out. Okay, so how do we do that? Is first of all, we create something called script.js. And so any files that have the suffix .js is essentially saying that this is a JavaScript file. And here we have created a function. A function is essentially kind of like a few lines of code that does something. And here we're trying to say that if the user clicks on that button, we will send an alert inside the browser saying that Macintosh was sold out. So for instance, click here. So this is an alert. This alert is saying that Macintosh was sold out. And so once we have created this function, sold out, how do we include it inside HTML? First of all, we need to import our JavaScript here by using the script tag and followed by the link to the JavaScript file. And then we can simply add an onClick property to the link. It's saying that essentially when the user clicks on the link, this function will be triggered. And the name of the function is sold out, which corresponds to the function here. This way the HTML can be linked to JavaScript. And then once the user click on this purchase, as you can see, an alert pops out, says that Macintosh was sold out. Okay, so this is a very, very brief introduction of web development and also of JavaScript. And you can do a lot of other very cool stuff using JavaScript. This is just a very brief glimpse into it. And if you're interested in learning more about web development or just full stack development in general, you can check our decal website, which is fullstackdecal.com. In our all our materials essentially public facing. So let me just open it up here. And even if you're not in the decal, you can still access all these materials. And also, I just want to mention the decal. If you would like to join the decal, the application will end in 3 days. So essentially, it will end in January 30th. So please be sure to apply if you would like to join. And yeah, this is all our presentation or our workshop today. Thank you all for coming.